everybody, welcome back to the Renaissance Woodworker. I'm your host, Shannon Rogers, and of course, welcome into my shop. It's Get Woodworking Week. This is the week where we try to encourage new people into woodworking. We try to encourage the beginner woodworkers amongst us to try that new thing, that more advanced topic. So today, I want to talk about what many consider to be an advanced topic. I think really we let ourselves and what others say get in the way of this relatively simple topic. Of course, I'm talking about freehand sharpening. I can think of no better way to improve your sharpening than to adopt a freehand model. It speeds things up because you don't have to worry about any kind of jig. It actually makes it easier to remove the burr from a blade because you don't have to pull the blade out of a jig in order to flip it over and work the back. And you can flip back and forth from bevel to back and remove that burr cleanly so you get that perfect junction of planes for the perfectly sharp edge. Because you're not dealing with any kind of jig, it doesn't matter the shape of the blade or the size of the blade. Anything is possible, from draw knives to molding irons to plane blades to chisels to travisher blades to axes. Anything is possible when you can sharpen freehand. Of course, if sharpening is easier and it doesn't require any setup, you'll be more prone to do it more often, which means you'll have sharper edges. And I can think of no better way to improve your woodworking than to work with sharp edges. Let's face it, sharp edges fix everything. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, freehand sharpening is not just an instant fix. It is a trial and error process that does require a little bit of practice to get it right. I think the myth is that it takes years to master this. The reality is it could be minutes to hours to get repeatable, consistent, and sharp results from your tools. The freehand honing, freehand sharpening will work with any sharpening media, from water stones to sandpaper to oil stones to diamond stones. It doesn't really matter because it's all about how you hold the tool and take it to the stone, or sometimes how you take the stone or the sharpening media to the tool itself. The one constant is I highly, highly recommend that you have a dedicated sharpening station in your shop. You want to keep all the swarf, that's the metal debris that comes off your blades, away from your workbench where you're going to be working wood, where that swarf can get into the wood and gum up and cause issues with your blades as you plane or chisel or whatever it is you're doing. Set yourself up a dedicated sharpening station where you can always have your sharpening media of choice set up and ready to go. If you've got to pull things out and set them up, it defeats the purpose of not needing a guide to speed up the process. Now, as far as methods for freehand honing, there are a bunch of different ways because our honing guide, basically our hands, is incredibly flexible. So there's a bunch of different things you can try. I'm going to show you a couple different methods. You can try those, see how they work, and if one of them works for you, great. If not, you could try blending some of them together. So the first thing I want to do is focus on locking in place all of the unnecessary stuff. So my fingers, my wrist, my elbow, I really want to lock everything below my shoulder. And I can move just right from the shoulder. Now you can see my elbow is going to move here. So I can't really just move the shoulder and expect my elbow not to move. So what I do, I lock everything in place, including my shoulder, and I step back with one foot and rock my whole body back. And then rock forward, rock my whole body back. Each time I'm coming forward, I'm lifting the stone off, lifting the blade off the stone. And as I rock my body back, I'm pulling on the bevel. And each time I come back and return, I kind of feel that bevel and pull back from there. So that's just locking everything from the shoulder down and just stepping back and moving your whole body. Another thing you can do is feel the bevel on the stone and think about pivoting from your ankles. Imagine you have no joints whatsoever in your body except for your ankles, and you kind of have a hinge right at your ankle. And you bend back on that hinge and bend forward on that hinge. And what's really happening is I'm shifting my weight from the balls of my feet and my toes back to my heel. Toes, heel. But I'm not actually lifting the foot up at all. I'm just working right at the ankle. I find this is actually a little bit easier because I'm moving even less. When I step back, there's still a chance that some movement can happen up in the upper part of your body, whereas bending from the ankles, I keep my feet planted and I can really isolate everything and keep my bevel constant. Another thing you can do, if you turn your stone sideways, I will actually get a little bit wider stance. It's a little bit hard to see in this angle, but essentially I'll just rock back and forth, kind of shifting my weight from side to side. Again, keeping my wrists locked, my fingers locked, my elbows, my shoulders, everything locked, and just rocking my whole body from side to side. As I said, I like a wider stance. I know some people like to actually put their feet together, so they've got a real narrow stance, and they can pivot a little bit more and kind of tilt from side to side a little bit more. To me, I always feel like I'm going to fall over, and I end up losing concentration on the bevel and concentrate more on not falling on my butt. So wider stance, I will find, is a little bit easier to do. Remember those junior high school dances where all you did on the slow song was just do a little side to side? You didn't even lift your feet up, just move side to side? That's where that little move is going to come in handy, right here. Now, all of these methods require taking the blade to the stone. There will be times when you need to take the stone or the sharpening media to the blade. In my sharpening kit, I have an arsenal of other tools, like these diamond paddles in coarse, medium, and fine. Actually, I think they're medium, fine, and extra fine, but I keep them around for those times when I have to take the sharpening media to the blade. Another one I have is this also DMT kind of butterfly knife dealio, where I've got red and blue grits, or medium and fine, I think. I've also got a series of conical stones, diamond stones. I've got this conical kind of rat tail diamond stone, which can be really, really useful for unusual shaped things. So regular plain blade like this, I wouldn't really take the blade or the sharpening stone to the blade, but in something like this ovalo molding plane, being able to take one of these slipstone looking things and run it up the middle of this ovalo. And essentially I can put 2 fingers on the back of it, or however many fingers you can fit on the back of the blade, grab the tang and nestle it right up against my palm. I'll take my elbow and lock it against my body in such a way that I'm sighting right down the bevel. My line of sight runs right in line with that bevel. And then with my other hand, I can come right up here and run this up precisely on that shape. And it's something like this where I've got a really wide ovalo. This stone won't cover the whole thing, so you kind of have to rotate it. I'm twisting this hand and scribing through the complete arc of this profile. And I found this is easily the best way to deal with these more complex edges. And I've quickly pulled up a burr there, and you can see where I polished that tip. Now, this blade still needs to be restored a little bit, so there's some other spots here I might want to clean up the whole bevel. This is a good example, these complex molding irons. Another one can be something like an in shave, where it's going to be easier to take your sharpening media, and I'll hold the handle and kind of lock this against my body again so that I'm sighting down the bevel, and I will work along the edge. And as I work around the blade, I'll twist it so that I continually can see that bevel angle. So in this instance, I'm not really locking, I'm locking the bevel, but I'm holding the tool at a constant angle that keeps it at that bevel. So as I work the sharpening media across it, the tool itself is not moving, and I'm adjusting that to match. If you've seen my video on honing wood turning tools, this is the exact same process I'm using there. Whatever your method of locking in the bevel and moving your body to sharpen, the grip you choose is absolutely key. And this is what I do. I always want to lock my hands together so they essentially function as one. So the first thing I do is actually interlock my thumbs underneath the blade. So back here, my thumbs are locked under, and I like to weave my fingers together, kind of interlace them, so that I've got pressure all the way across the blade from both hands. And depending upon the width of the blade, you may have to kind of tweak this a little bit. Obviously, the narrower blades, you really won't be able to get more than like one finger on. But the more you can get your hands working in concert, the better off you're going to be. The other thing is, I like to position my fingers right on the edge of the blade so that actually the pads of my fingers are actually trailing on the stone as I work my way back. And I like to think of this as almost like an outrigger. As I feel the bevel, I'm anchored to the stone, and I've got real positive contact, and I'm able to, well, I need a little bit more water first. I'm able to really feel what's happening with the blade. Outrigger or depth stop or something like that seems to be an apt metaphor for this. You'll have to mess around with that and figure out exactly what's going to be comfortable. I recommend trying, a couple of different sizes of blades to see how your fingers lay on them. There will be times when you won't be able to interlace your fingers or interlock your hands into one. And in that instance, sometimes it's good just to wrap one hand over the other. So you've got both hands moving in concert. As you move your body back, if I've got one hand over here, there's more tendency that for this arm to be able to move around because there's really nothing anchoring it or holding it kind of square to your body. If you put both hands on it, you essentially square off your shoulders, and it's easier to move it as one unit. So even if there's no interlacing, put this hand over top of the other to hold it in place. The biggest thing is you need to relax. Don't worry so much about square and the exact bevel angles. That's going to come later, but also it's not entirely necessary. And this is something we really need to talk about when it comes to freehand work. If I'm freehanding this bevel, it doesn't matter what it is because I don't have to set a jig to a specific bevel angle. So say I sharpened a blade using a jig at 25 degrees and I come back and my jig is set at 35 degrees. It's not going to sharpen very quickly. So then I have to reset the jig. I have to remember what bevel angle I set on this, reset the jig to that, and go sharpen. Right now, I have no idea what bevel angle this is. I just take it to the stone, set it on there till I feel that bevel, and I sharpen. Now, I do like to sharpen all of my plane blades at 25 degrees, and you will develop kind of muscle memory for that angle. Again, that will come with time, and don't get caught up on these bevel angles and worrying about keeping it perfectly straight. If the blade itself is ever so slightly skewed, in a plane anyway, that's what a lateral adjuster is for. We want to try to keep it as square as we can, but as you're learning and as you're getting this muscle memory to develop, don't obsess over that. Start with as wide a chisel you have. This is a 1.5 inch. A 1-inch chisel would be good as well. Or go with a nice thick plane blade. This is a hawk iron, so it's a full 1/4 inch thick. The reason for that is regardless of the bevel angle, if you've got a thicker amount of steel, the bevel itself is going to be wider in order to get through that thicker amount of steel. Chisels, especially wide ones, are also quite beefy. The cross section of this chisel is more than 1/4 inch. It's probably more like 5/16. So again, a similar bevel is going to be much wider on this than it would be on those really narrow, like 1/8 inch irons. So you've got a much wider wheelbase, if you will, to balance on. So I'm pulling this blade back straight towards me. if I set it up right now as it is, where it's essentially parallel to the stone, I can feel that bevel okay, but as I pull back, it rocks really easily on that bevel in the direction that I'm traveling. If I skew the thing, then as along the stone, it won't tip because I've got this longer surface area here moving in this direction. It will still obviously tip this way, but if I position my fingers in such a way where I'm working straight back, it's much, much more stable. And I realize my hands are kind of covering this up. Instead of putting the webbing on between my thumb and forefinger, instead of putting it right underneath the chisel like this and pulling straight back, I'm shifting it over and putting it kind of on the side of the blade, locking my thumbs underneath. So I'm still positioning my body and my hands the same way so I can pull straight back. But if you look, the chisel is pointed over this direction instead of straight back towards me. It's skewed and providing that longer wheelbase that I can really balance on and get much more stability. Certain tools I will skew more than others. Certain tools I don't need to skew at all. When you watched me use this, I was barely skewing it because I've got a really nice wide stable blade here. So I'll bring the blade up, I'll feel for that bevel until it sits flat on the stone. I'll pull back, I lift the whole chisel up and come forward on the stone, pull back again. I'm only cutting on that pull stroke. If you try to cut on the push stroke, there's more opportunity of creating a convex bevel, which some people like that, I'm not a fan, or of getting it to stutter along the stone. You also have the opportunity of just possibly tripping and falling over like that. So definitely you'll find you've got more control by pulling always. So while I'm pulling on the bevel, it's essentially causing the burr to trail out here in front of it. So if I flip it over and I pull on the back, all the burr is doing is trailing behind the blade. It will come off, but it's going to take more strokes. If you actually push it, what's happening is that burr is folding under, kind of underneath the wheels of the bus and coming off. And it may not come off in the first push, but it takes very few strokes for it to come off. Now I like to actually push across the stone and all the way off the edge, because then I can lift up and I don't run the risk of dubbing that edge or rounding it over because I've run it against the stone. The more you move your body, the more opportunity there is to change that bevel angle. So if you're having trouble with that longer stroke, change it from pulling straight back to moving in a circular motion. And you're still locking your wrists, your elbows, but now I'm moving a little bit more from my shoulders, but I'm just moving in little circles. This is actually really effective and one of my favorite ways of doing this because you can get real even coverage over the entire stone. And I actually think I can get more sharpening. I cover more real estate on the stone in a less amount of time. So if you look at the stone, you can see there's a pattern over the entire stone. I may miss this little corner here, but I've covered the whole thing. So it's going to keep your stone flatter longer that way. All of this body movement mechanics I'm talking about, unlocking your body, when you sit down, you're essentially changing your center of gravity and you're relying more upon your arms to do the work. Well, the minute you do that, you're closer you're getting to this bevel angle, the more opportunity, more chance you're going to have of changing that bevel angle. If I'm standing, now I can lock my body and just do it in the feet. So nothing has to move up by my hands, shoulders, anything like that. This is too tall. As I stand next to it, it's right about hip height. What I actually prefer is something that's going to be about the same height as my workbench, which for me is when I put my arm straight down to my side and my palm flat, the bench falls right there, which is about 34 inches on me. If you set your sharpening stone down lower, now I can actually extend my arm so that my elbow is straight and I can even further lock my arm And whether I'm stepping back or rocking back and forth, it's even easier to lock my body. It's also really easy to do the circular motion. If you take a wider stance, lock elbows, arms, everything, and just rotate almost from the hips at this point to do that circular motion. It's a much easier on a lower surface. Right in the center, you'll see some different scratch patterns from a coarser stone, or actually a grinding wheel. When you put it up against the wheel, the bevel will actually take the curvature of that wheel. So the center of the bevel is hollow. It's cut deeper than the two outer edges. So now, and you can see those polished edges at the heel of the bevel and down at the toe of the bevel. So now when I do bring it to the stone to work, instead of having to balance this long, wide bevel, it hits in two places only, right at the toe, right at the heel of the bevel, and it kind of clicks into place. As I usually will start low and lift it up, and you'll feel it. Click is the best way I can think to describe it. It just clicks or snaps right onto that bevel, and the hollow grind makes it a lot easier to feel that. However, I don't want you to use that so much as a crutch. It's an excellent place to start, and I highly recommend hollow grinding anyway, but there will be times when you're not going to be able to use a hollow grind. Grinding this profile is next to impossible unless you have a profile grinding wheel or a really narrow grinding wheel. You can't really get in and grind this hollow. So this, when I get it restored, will be a perfectly flat bevel, and I won't be able to rock on it. Now, this may not be the best example because I would take the tool to this. This chisel it's been honed for a while now, and my bevels, my polished bevels, are getting wider and wider. The wider those get, the less pronounced that hollow grind is, and you're able to feel it less and less. So it's a good place to start, but you want to get in the habit of not relying on it. And the most important reason is I like to add micro bevels here. So I will start out on that hollow ground bevel, and I'll sharpen until I wipe away all trace of a micro bevel. Then I'll come back and I'll lift it ever so slightly, and you may not have even seen that. We're talking, a hair's breadth higher. And now I'll go into my circular motion on that micro bevel angle. What is that angle? No idea. 1 or 2 degrees within my original bevel. But I'm definitely not using the hollow grind here. The heel of this bevel is completely off the stone now, and I'm just working until I feel a burr, which I have. And if all I can do is freehand sharpen when I feel that hollow grind, then this micro bevel process just won't work for me. Now at this point I know what you're thinking. My honing jig works great. I finally figured it out, my sharpening, I'm getting sharp blades. Why would I want to mess with that? It's fine. There's not a thing wrong with using honing guides, and I certainly don't want to try to mess up anybody's sharpening routine. But consider this. I personally think it's inevitable that you're going to have to learn to freehand sharpen because you're going to run into those blades that just won't work in a guide. If you work with molding plane irons like this, it just doesn't fit in a guide. You're going to want to freehand it on the stone. If you ever do fort planes or scrub planes where you've got a more radical camber to them, and you saw me do this when I restored a fort plane a couple episodes ago, that was all done freehand. I don't know of a honing guide that will allow you to do that, even with one of those neato camber roller type things. The more you get into woodworking and the more tools that you use, this is going to come up more and more. Draw knives, in-shaves, scorps, travishers, all those chair making tools, this will come up time and again. Carving gouges. And I do most of my sharpening on a strop with a carving gouge, but that's all done freehand. You're not able to take a carving gouge with, a curved profile or a back bent gouge or something like that, or an in cannel where I've got to work on the edge like this. There's no way a honing guide's going to work for you. You've got to be able to do it freehand. So you don't have to go too obscure or too deep into woodworking before you run into instances where freehand sharpening is the way you have to go. not just a cool thing and a fast way to do it, it's the only way to do it when you get to those weird edge shapes. So my parting shot to this would be, consider how sharp your tools will be when sharpening is not a chore, when sharpening is not even an event, when sharpening just happens and you're back to work. And that's what freehand sharpening can do for you. If you have a dedicated sharpening station with a stone or whatever media you choose already set up, one step over, 30 seconds, and you're back to work. It's just that easy. You don't even think about sharpening anymore. And when your tools are always sharp, you're just a better woodworker. This is not one of those things where you're not a good woodworker unless you freehand sharpen. It's one of those things that I think will help you in the long run. Look at it this way. We invest time to practice in cutting dovetails or mortise and tenons. Why not invest some time in learning how to freehand sharpen? I think that's a technique that you will be able to use across a wider spectrum of woodworking than just a specific joint. You'll be able to use it on all of your tools, and it will make you faster and more efficient. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.